I have not made another part in my Quake review series in over a year, and that's because I've been dreading the day where I had to look at the Quake II Mission Packs. Before we get into those expansions, I'm going to give you a quick rundown on why I do not like Quake II. I understand that this game has a ton of supporters that played it back when it was released and they had great times with friends in multiplayer. I'm not one of those people. I think Quake 2 feels terrible to play, first and foremost. Having smooth movement is a huge reason why I like classic first-person shooters to begin with. Quake 1 is fast and fun, and when you move and jump around the space, you get a hang of the controls very quickly. Quake 2 is not like that. The jumping feels off, the way that you descend down slopes is fucking weird, and what I can't stand about not liking a game's controls is not knowing how to really explain how bad they are. You just have to play it for yourself. Quake 2 also suffers from having unsatisfying guns. Now, how the fuck did id Software mess up the gunplay in a first-person shooter? Well, all of the guns have a downside to them, which in itself is okay. Doom Eternal's roster of guns is situational, and some are better than others depending on the combat encounter. With Quake 2 though, all of the guns have some kind of defect that make them not enjoyable to fire. The shotgun is way too slow. Both the machine gun and chain gun have ridiculous recoil that make them impractical within combat. And the wind down on the chain gun specifically is so fucking annoying. You just waste a whole bunch of ammo as the chain gun cools off, and it's complete nonsense. The hand grenades are laughably bad, and the time it takes to activate the grenade, then throw it across the room and blow up feels like an eternity. The grenade launcher again suffers from being too slow of a weapon, and in an allegedly fast-paced shooter, this is an issue and it'll no doubt get you killed. The rocket launcher is fine. Thank fucking god they didn't mess that gun up. 1 out of 11 ain't bad, I guess. To be fair, the Hyper Blaster is the more reliable version of a machine gun, obviously taking up cells instead of bullets, and this one isn't too bad either. However, it still feels very weak and lacks the impact of the other id Software plasma guns. The railgun and the BFG are your super powerful weapons and they're fine. As a whole though, most of the weapon roster kinda sucks in Quake 2, and that's so weird because they nailed the guns in Quake 1. Of course you can poke holes in Quake 1's guns. Maybe you don't like how there's so many variations of the shotgun and nail gun for example. That being said, at least they don't handicap the player with defective guns like Quake 2. The hub-style level structure in Quake 2 is also not my cup of tea. I prefer the singular maps of Doom and the original Quake, but I think Quake 2's hubs would be fine if everything didn't look the same. I get so turned around because the color palette is so bland, and none of the textures stand out. I understand that the game was revolutionary at the time, but the art style didn't look appealing even back then. You might think that I'm being too harsh, but this was all just my genuine reaction when playing Quake 2 for the first time. The controls feel off, the art style is uninspired, the level progression isn't rewarding, the gunplay is genuinely below average, etc. I always feel like I'm constantly adapting to the weapon's dysfunctionality, whether that be their slow fire rates or insane recoil, and that's an off-putting factor when you're shooting at bad guys for most of the game. I know Quake 2 is worshipped, and people think it's one of the hallmark first-person shooters from the 90s, but it's like, are we playing different games? I just don't get it, and I want to join in on the fun with everyone else who enjoys this game, but I think it sucks. I'm sorry. Quake 2 introduces the Strug storyline, and it's one that I'm not invested in. Now, Quake 1 didn't really have a story at all, but I kinda like how it's just a mashup of a whole bunch of different ideas. Sci-fi tech bases? Yeah, let's throw it into Quake. Lovecraftian elements and medieval castles? Sure, let's chuck it in. I know that Quake 2 was originally not supposed to be a Quake game, but even if it was the first installment of a new, separate franchise, Quake 2 still doesn't have a compelling story, or enemies to fight for that matter. The Strug War is told from different perspectives in the mission packs, as you play as brand new characters. I mean, they might as well be the exact same guy, because all of them don't talk or have any personality. Oh well, let's just move on to the actual expansions. I've wasted more than enough time bitching about the base campaign already. Alright, so the first mission pack is known as the Reckoning, and it was made by, oh god, no! Zaytrix Entertainment, the same fuckers who made Redneck Rampage. We're in for a fucking treat, I just know it. I'm not even going to get into the story because who cares? Quake 2 was never known for its enthralling plots, and I really don't think Zaytrix Entertainment, of all developers, is really going to flesh it out much. Alright, maybe I'm being a bit too critical. I mean, to be fair on Zaytrix, they eventually formed into Grey Matter Interactive and created Return to Castle Wolfenstein, so they have done some good work in the past. Back to the Reckoning, the same complaints I have with Quake 2 are present in the expansion. Sure, they add some new enemies and weapons, but the core gameplay is basically the same, and all of the game's issues still plague the Reckoning. In the first level, you crash land in some kind of swamp wilderness area, and it's not interesting to explore. Nothing captures your eye, and it's a shame because getting out of these standard tech bases should be a good thing. Quake 2's art style in general has aged terribly, and the expansions look just as bland. Right out of the gate, you're up against these new creatures named Gex, and all they do is hop around the place and spit green projectiles at you. They're not that fun or challenging to fight, and yeah, I have not missed the Quake 2 combat in the slightest. We have iconic weapons like the machine gun that always points up as you're trying to fire it, and the shotgun that reloads as slow as a sloth taking a shit. The next part of the level is set in the sewers, and the map design so far is extremely fucking dull. I mean, just look at this. Would you really want to play this shit? At least they introduce soldier enemies in the sewers that feature more interesting AI than the Gex. Everything looks identical in this section, which makes it confusing, tedious, and not entertaining to navigate. Oh wait, I can't forget about this awesome trap where you suddenly lose a chunk of health by not going as fast as possible while underwater. Who in their right mind would start an expansion or any game with a sewer/underwater level anyway? Eventually you make it to a Strog compound, where it just looks the exact same to almost every fucking other tech-based level in Quake 2. Fantastic. I'm so glad that I'm playing this mission pack, for levels that I've already basically played in the original campaign. I tried to test out the grenades on these low tier soldiers here, but there's no point, because you toss them out way too slow, and by the time they land on the ground and explode, the enemies have already run to the other side of the map. A little detail in Quake 2 that they incorporated to attempt to be cutting edge is the enemy death animations. Even though it's a cool mechanic, in theory, they interrupt the pace of the combat, since if you kill a monster and try to run across the corpse in the middle of a firefight, you can't, because they still take up space as they're performing their death animation. What a stupid oversight in my opinion, and I cannot believe id Software didn't just take this out of the game. I get that they wanted to cram as many neat details as possible into Quake 2, but the death animations disrupt the overall gameplay. Some ideas are quite awesome though, like the flies hovering around corpses that have been dead for a while. This is just a cool graphical detail that doesn't impede on the player's experience. Anyway, the compound marks the return of the most infuriating enemy from the base campaign, the Gunner. This dude shoots out grenades from his left arm and has a machine gun replacing his right arm. He doesn't just fire out a couple of grenades at a time, no. He shoots 5 or 6 in a row that you have to avoid, and then wait for them to explode. Quake 2 is supposed to be this fast-paced shooter for people with fast reflexes, but most of my time is spent waiting for this asshole to stop firing shit from his arms. So in level 2, you collect the CD and you have to bring it to the intelligence center, which will take you like half an hour. My biggest issue with the Reckoning specifically is the boring level design. Mission Pack 2 Ground Zero might be way more unforgiving in terms of enemy placement and the overuse of its new turret enemy, but the Reckoning is a downright slog to get through. Every room looks the same in the military base, and while yeah, when you travel down to the core reactor, it looks pretty cool, it's too little, too late. Not to mention, there is some annoying platforming in the core reactor, with the swinging hammers section being the most egregious example. The new enemies that you encounter in Mission Pack 1 are pretty much just variations on base Quake 2 monsters. I don't really have an issue with this, I mean why would I? Plenty of FPS expansions do it, and it's the level design that lets the Reckoning down the most. Oh, and the fact that it's an expansion for Quake 2 of all games. Level 3 is literally the exact same thing as the last level, so there's not much to talk about. We're mulching over the same ground, and frankly, if I was not playing for a review, I'd probably stop at the end of level 2. However, we must persist for the sake of completion. Eventually, the player arrives on a moon base and faces off against the final boss from Quake 2's base game. Yeah, I'm not kidding, they recycle the same boss fight. Mission Pack 1 is pretty disposable, and the only kinda interesting thing about it is the new weapons that they hand to the player. The particle gun is my favorite, as it shoots out 2 fiery projectiles, and I like how it's a pump action weapon. That being said, please do not waste your energy on the Reckoning, as that mostly copies the same tech bases as the original game, and the wilderness area isn't that interesting either. Ground Zero is the second expansion for Quake 2, and it was developed by Rogue Entertainment instead. The general consensus is that Ground Zero is worse than its predecessor, and that's probably due to its hard difficulty. The most unfair inclusion in Ground Zero is the new turret enemy, as I said before, and these guys show up everywhere, mounted on every wall to shoot at the player. Taking the turrets out can get incredibly tiresome, and I can see players just giving up after a while. In the later levels, these turrets appear around every single corner it seems like, and they are placed to where you don't notice them until you're getting shot at. That all aside, the level design in Ground Zero is better than the Reckoning. The first level is way more visually engaging with the underground cavern setting, and luckily the turrets don't show up in large numbers yet. The new enemies that Ground Zero introduces from level 2 onward are bullshit and cheapen the overall experience, but the core design is still superior to Mission Pack 1. I mean, it is still Quake 2, so I'm not having a good time playing, and the levels are still uninspired tech bases for the most part. Aside from the turrets, the Daedalus is basically an upgraded version of the Icarus, with the new primary addition being a shield that he has. This shield is absolutely ridiculous, and it's so annoying to fight through. The Stalker is a pesky little spider type creature that jumps on the ceiling, and its frantic movement can really throw players off. The new weapons are fairly derivative from Quake 1 and Quake 2, and there's not much to really talk about. There's a nail gun, which doesn't hit that hard unfortunately. The plasma beam is kinda like the Thunderbolt, but way less powerful. The mine launcher is a worthless piece of shit that you should not use at all, and the chainsaw just exists as a melee weapon. I guess it's a cool nod to Doom, but it doesn't exactly have the same utility as that game's chainsaw. Yeah, so Ground Zero can get repetitive due to its enemy placement, and it's considerably harder than the previous mission pack. But I had a way more depressing experience playing The Reckoning due to its barren level design. Jesus Christ, it's like pick your poison with these Quake II mission packs. I hope I have outlined why I not only dislike The Reckoning and Ground Zero, but what I find wrong with Quake II as a whole. There's no doubt in my mind that Quake II is the worst id Software game, even though it did have some revolutionary concepts for the FPS genre. I despise the hub style of level design in this game, but I cannot deny that it helped move the genre forward. I don't like how the enemy animation disrupts the flow of the game, but they were technologically impressive at the time. The gunplay is sloppy and the movement is cumbersome, but on the other hand, it was originally not a Quake game, so I don't think it's entirely fair to directly compare it to the first Quake. I know that some people love Quake 2, for its multiplayer component mainly, but still, I'm aware of a fanbase that this game has. Sorry to say, but I'm not on board, and these two mission packs especially need to get in the nearest bin possible. However, there is some good news to come of this. I can finally conclude this 10-part Quake review series now with the latest Quake 1 expansions, Dimension of the Past and Dimension of the Machine.